Some men spend their whole lives trying to be the kind of son their father would be proud of. I spent mine trying to be half the man he already was, and I still wasn't sure I cleared the bar. My father didn't ask for much. That was the thing about Harold Mercer. He didn't ask for much, and he didn't complain about anything, and he had a handshake that could stop a conversation cold because it was so deliberate, so completely present, that you understood immediately you were dealing with a man who meant what he said. He'd been that way my entire life. He was still that way at 79, which is exactly why, when he called me at 6:08 on a Thursday morning and told me his chest felt tight and his left arm was doing something he couldn't quite explain, I knew it was serious. Harold Mercer did not call to report things that weren't serious. He never had. My name is Gerald Mercer. I'm 54 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a 4-bedroom house on Pemberton Road that is slightly too large for 2 people, and which I have been meaning to repaint for 3 years. I retired from municipal infrastructure engineering 2 years ago after 31 years with the city, most of them spent on water treatment systems and drainage projects that nobody notices until they stop working. I coach a men's recreational softball league on Tuesday evenings. I drive a 2017 Ford F-150 that runs perfectly and has 94,000 miles on it, and a coffee cup ring on the center console that's been there since 2021. And until the morning of February 6th, I consider myself a reasonably contented man. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Let me tell you about my father first, because nothing that comes after makes sense without him. Harold Eugene Mercer was born in 1946 in Kannapolis, North Carolina, the second of 4 boys, to a man who worked a mill and a woman who kept everything running on a budget that should not have been able to keep anything running at all. He grew up understanding that money was a tool, not a personality, and that a man's word was either worth something or it wasn't, and there was no middle ground between those two conditions. He joined the Army at 19, came back at 22, learned masonry and drywall and electrical and plumbing because, as he put it once, a man who can fix things is never entirely helpless, and helpless was the one thing Harold Mercer refused to be. He married my mother, Patricia, and in 1971. They had me in 1971 also, which I will tell you requires no further mathematics on your part. They were married for 38 years, until she passed from pancreatic cancer in 2009, and in all those years I never once heard him raise his voice at her. Not once. They disagreed. They had the specific silences that long marriages produce, silences that contain entire arguments compressed into a single look across a kitchen table. But he never raised his voice. He told me once, when I was about 17, and running my mouth at dinner in a way I immediately regretted, that a man who has to get loud has already run out of better options. I've thought about that sentence probably 400 times since. After Mom passed, he stayed in a house on Caldwell Street in Concord, 23 miles from Charlotte, a white aluminum-sided colonial with a workshop and a garage and a vegetable garden in the backyard that he maintained with the same deliberate precision he brought to everything else. He drove a 2011 Buick LeSabre that had 61,000 miles on it and was the cleanest used car I had ever seen, which told you everything you needed to know about Harold Mercer. He was not lonely, exactly. He had his church. He had his neighbor Frank, a retired postal worker 2 doors down, with whom he played chess every Saturday at 10 a.m. without variation. He had me. He had his garden. He had his workshop. He was not a man who required entertainment. He was a man who required purpose, and he found it every day. I visited every 2 weeks. Sunday afternoons, most of the time. Sometimes I brought dinner. Sometimes he cooked, and when Harold Mercer cooked, which was not something he'd done much when Mom was alive, it turned out he had learned to do it methodically and competently, the way he learned everything, which should not have surprised me at all. We'd sit in his kitchen, a small room clean, the countertops clear except for a wooden knife block and a ceramic rooster that had been there since 1987, and which neither of us had ever commented on, and we'd talk. Not about feelings, particularly about the garden, about the softball league, about city infrastructure projects I'd worked on that he found genuinely interesting, because he understood, on a practical level, what it meant to make systems that held. My wife, Sandra, came to those Sunday visits less and less frequently over the years. In the beginning, she came regularly, then occasionally, then rarely, and then, in the last 2 years before February, almost never. She always had something, a thing she needed to do, a call she was on, a commitment she'd made that she didn't mention until Sunday morning. I stopped pressing her about it. That was a mistake I understand now for exactly what it was. A man telling himself that smoothing things over was the same as having things be fine. It was not the same thing. It was not even close. Sandra was 51 years old. She worked in pharmaceutical marketing, which meant she was good at framing things, good at presenting information in whatever arrangement produced a desired conclusion, and good at making you feel that her version of events was simply the accurate one. She was organized. She was efficient. She kept the house the way she kept her work calendar. Everything in its column, everything with its label, and she had a specific kind of competence that I had admired when we met and which had gradually, over 19 years, calcified into something that felt less like capability and more like control. I want to be honest about that. She wasn't a cruel woman. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, that the things she prioritized were the things that mattered, and that the things she didn't prioritize were, by definition, manageable by someone else. She just didn't realize how clearly that showed. My father called at 6:08 a.m. on Thursday, February 6th. I know the exact time because my phone was on a nightstand and I saw the screen before I picked up. Dad. I picked up on the first ring. Gerald. His voice was measured. Not thin, not frightened, just careful, like a man walking across a surface he wasn't entirely sure will hold. Dad. You okay? Chest has been tight since about 4 this morning. He paused. Left arm's been going on and off. I was already sitting up. Left arm? It's probably nothing. I didn't want to call it this hour, but Frank's away until Saturday, and I figured, Dad, stop. I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm coming right now. Don't move. Sit in the kitchen, okay? Don't walk around. Just sit. All right, he said. And the thing about Harold Mercer was that he said all right the way you say all right when you've been waiting for someone to give you permission to stop managing alone. Just 2 words. But I heard 38 years of a man who never asked for help, and I understood completely. I hung up, stood. Sandra was awake. I knew she was awake because the specific quality of her breathing had changed. The way it does when someone is listening without wanting you to know they're listening. I didn't test it. I just told her straight. My dad's having chest pains. Left arm. I need to go to Concord right now. A pause. My truck is in the shop. I need to take your car. I said it plainly. No preamble, no softening. Here's the situation. Here's what I need. 31 years of engineering teaches you to state requirements clearly. I stated the requirement clearly. Sandra sat up. She looked at me. Her face was the face she wore when she was processing something she had already, in some prior version of the conversation, decided. Gerald. She said my name with the flat patience of a woman who felt she was being reasonable. I have my walk at 7, and then the Henderson call at 9. That call has been scheduled for 3 weeks. Your car, I said. My truck's in the shop. Your father's having chest pains. Call an ambulance. He doesn't like ambulances. He had a bad experience when... Sandra. My voice came out quieter than I expected. His left arm is going numb. She looked at me for a moment, something in her face that I can only describe as the calculation of inconvenience. Then she said 4 words. Not my problem, Gerald. She said it quietly, almost gently, the way you'd say I don't think so, or I'm not sure. Like the content of the sentence was perfectly reasonable, and only the tone needed to stay civil. She settled back against the pillow, reached for her phone on the nightstand. You have people you can call. I stood in that bedroom for exactly 3 seconds. Not because I was deciding. I had already decided. I was just documenting it. The specific image of my wife reaching for her phone at 6:09 in the morning, while my father sat alone in his kitchen on Caldwell Street with his chest tight and his left arm going wrong. I filed that image away in the place where I keep things I intend to think about later, with precision, without emotion, the way I was trained to approach problems that needed solving rather than surviving. I said okay. That was all. Just okay. I picked up my phone, walked out of the bedroom, pulled the door shut quietly behind me because I have never in my life slammed a door, and I was not going to start at 6:09 in the morning over a woman who had just told me my 79-year-old father's chest pains were not her problem. I went downstairs, stood in the kitchen for 12 seconds, thinking. My truck, a 2017 Ford F-150, currently sitting at Henderson's Auto on Brookshire Road with a coolant issue that had appeared Tuesday, was unavailable. Sandra CRV was in the garage, full tank, keys on the hook, off limits, apparently. Raymond Okafor, Ray, 73 years old, retired high school shop teacher, lived 2 houses down on the left side of Pemberton Road in a brick ranch he'd owned for 22 years. I'd helped him put up a new fence post last spring. He was 3 weeks out from knee replacement surgery on his right knee and was, according to our last conversation, doing better than the physical therapist expected, which surprised no one who knew Ray, because Raymond Okafor approached recovery the way he approached everything else, like a project with a timeline. I called him at 6:11 a.m. He picked up on the first ring. Yep, Ray, it's Gerald. I need a favor. My dad's having chest pains in Concord. My truck's in the shop. Can you drive me out? Not even a pause. Give me 5 minutes. I'll pull around front. That was it. No follow-up questions. No mention of the knee. No negotiating the hour. 5 minutes. Front of the house. I want you to remember Raymond Okafor said that at 6:11 in the morning, 3 weeks post-knee surgery. Without hesitation. Because you're going to hear a lot about what Sandra was doing during the next several hours, and the contrast matters. I called my father immediately after. Dad, I'm coming. A neighbor's driving me. 25 minutes, maybe 30. You hear me? Stay sitting. Gerald, I told you it's probably nothing. You told me the same thing in 2019 about the gallbladder. I said, and we both know how that went. Sit in the kitchen, don't get up, and unlock the front door right now. A small sound, almost a laugh. All right. Ray pulled up in 4 minutes and 50 seconds. I counted. He was in his gray Nissan Pathfinder, moving carefully out of the driver's seat when I came down the porch steps, and I said, Ray, I'll drive. And he looked at me for half a second, and then said, yeah, probably smart, and handed me the keys without ceremony. That's the thing about people who actually know how to help. They don't make a production of it. They just move. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We made Concord in 22 minutes. I won't tell you I drove the speed limit the entire way because I didn't, but I drove it carefully because I had a 73-year-old man with a recovering knee in the passenger seat, and that required a different kind of urgency than recklessness. Ray sat quiet most of the way. He asked me once, somewhere on I-85, how long my dad had been having symptoms. Since 4 a.m., I told him. He nodded once, looked out at the highway, said nothing else. That was exactly the right response. I noted it. My father was sitting at the kitchen table when I came through the door at 6:41. Blue flannel shirt, work pants, boots already on, because Harold Mercer had apparently gotten dressed while having a possible cardiac event because showing up to a hospital half-dressed was not something he was willing to do. There was a cup of coffee on the table that had gone cold. He looked up when I came in. Gerald. Hey, Dad. I sat down across from him, looked at his face. Color was off, not dramatically. He wasn't gray, but there was a particular flatness behind his eyes that I didn't like. You still feeling it? He nodded slowly. On and off. The arm more than the chest now. Okay. I put my hand on the back of his briefly. We're going right now. He looked past me toward the door. Who's that in the car? Ray Okafor. Neighbor of mine. Harold looked at me. Came all the way out here at this hour? He lives 2 houses down, Dad. And yes, my father processed that quietly. Then he nodded in the direction of the door. Tell him to come in and have coffee while we're gone. Dad, the coffee's cold. Harold looked at the cup. Make him a fresh one. I made Ray a fresh cup of coffee. Ray came in. shook my father's hand, the real kind, with eye contact, and told him he had good timing, because he'd been up since 5 anyway and could use the excuse to stay out of the house. My father said he appreciated that. They talked for approximately 90 seconds about whether the Buick in the driveway was a LeSabre or a Park Avenue, a dispute my father won by producing the title from a kitchen drawer immediately, and which I will tell you is the most Harold Mercer thing that had ever happened in my presence. We left for Atrium Helka Bars at 6:48 a.m. Ray stayed at the kitchen table with his coffee and a copy of last Sunday's crossword that my father had not yet finished, which my father pointed specifically and said, "Don't look at the answers on the back page." And Ray said he'd never cheated at a crossword in his life. And my father said, "Good man," and we left. The ER was moving by 7 a.m. We checked in at 7:04. The intake nurse, a compact woman named Beverly Tran, who asked precise questions in a tone that communicated she had heard every possible answer and was not going to be surprised by any of them, got my father into an exam room within 11 minutes. The attending on call was Dr. Marcus Webb, late 40s, quiet voice. He looked at my father the way experienced doctors look at patients, like he was reading something he'd read before, and was looking for the line, "That was different this time." Mr. Mercer. He sat down across from my father on the rolling stool. "Tell me about the chest pressure." My father told him, precisely, in order, with times where he could provide them. Onset approximately 3:50 a.m., intermittent pressure, substernal, left arm heaviness, not pain, more like the arm was fighting gravity. No sweating, no nausea, no prior episodes of the specific combination. Dr. Webb listened without interrupting. When my father finished, Webb said, "We're running EKG right now and pull some enzyme levels. I want to see your troponin. The symptoms you're describing are ones we take seriously." My father looked at me. I said, "Do whatever he says, Dad." Harold nodded. "One question," he said to Webb. "How long are we going to be here?" Webb allowed himself a small smile. "Let's see what the EKG says first." My father looked back at me. "Practical man," he said, as if noting a favorable character reference. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Hard orange plastic chairs. A television mounted at a 45-degree angle to the wall, playing a morning news program that no one was watching. I drank a cup of coffee from the machine near the elevator that tasted like it had been made sometime during the previous administration, and I sat with my elbows on my knees and thought. Sandra did not text. Not once. Not "how is he?" Not "let me know what they say." Not even a perfunctory "everything okay" with a punctuation that signals genuine concern. Nothing. Her morning walk was 2 miles. Her Henderson call was at 9. She had things to do. Not her problem. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting in that waiting room. I want to be precise about it. I was not angry. Anger is a hot thing, an immediate thing, a thing that flares and consumes and passes. What I felt sitting in that orange chair at 7:22 in the morning was something colder and more permanent. It was a specific feeling of a man who has been given, finally, irrefutable clarity about a thing he's been telling himself wasn't quite true for a very long time. 19 years of Sandra deprioritizing my father. 19 years of she's busy and she had things, and well, you know how she is. The quiet rationalizations of a man who confuse keeping the peace with having peace. And now this. My father's chest tight since 4 a.m., sitting alone because Frank was out of town, and because the woman I married had a Henderson call at 9 and a morning walk at 7, and a 79-year-old man's cardiac symptoms simply did not fit the schedule. Something in me went very still. Cold, quiet, absolute. Not a decision yet. Not quite. But the ground was shifting underneath the part of me that had been standing on the assumption that things were basically fine. At 9:31 a.m., Dr. Marcus Webb came out to find me. Mr. Mercer. His face was serious but controlled. The face of a man delivering news he's delivered before, calibrated not to alarm but not to minimize. Your father has had what we call a non-ST elevation myocardial infarction, a mild heart attack. The troponin levels confirm it. He's stable, and I want to emphasize that, but we want to keep him for observation and run additional imaging to assess any damage and look at his coronary anatomy. I sat very still. Stable? Stable. Talking. He told me to tell you the crossword was harder than it looked. I laughed. The real kind, not the polite kind. That's him. Webb pulled up a chair, sat down across from me. Mr. Mercer, your father waited approximately 2 hours before calling anyone this morning. He said he didn't want to bother anyone. I know, in cases like his, those 2 hours matter. Webb looked at me steadily. He's going to be all right. But I want you to understand, if he'd waited another hour, we'd be having a different conversation. I sat with that. 2 hours. My father sitting in his kitchen in the dark at 4 o'clock in the morning with a heart attack starting because he didn't want to bother anyone. Because Patricia had been gone 15 years and Frank was out of town, and Harold Mercer had been trained by a lifetime of quiet competence to manage things alone until alone was no longer an option. I let myself feel that for exactly 4 seconds. Then I took out my phone. I called Ray first. He was still at Caldwell Street, apparently, because my father had told him the crossword was a Thursday one, and those were worth finishing. Ray, I said, mild heart attack. He's stable. They're keeping him. Thank you for this morning. Ray said, don't thank me for that, Gurr. That's just what you do. And I said, yeah, I know. And we sat on the line for a second in the way that people who understand each other can. Then I made 2 other calls. Both before 10 a.m., Sandra didn't know about either of them. But I want to tell you about them in order, because the order matters. The first call was to Margaret Osei, my father's attorney. He'd used her for 11 years. She drafted his will in 2014, handled the property transfer paperwork when he paid off the house in 2017, and done his advance directives in 2021. I'd met her twice. Precise woman. Deliberate voice. The kind of lawyer who listened like she was transcribing, not just hearing. I called her office at 9:47 a.m. and left a message with her assistant that said my father, Harold Mercer, was hospitalized following a cardiac event, and I needed a conversation with Ms. Osei at her earliest availability regarding his POA documentation and directive review. The second call was to my own attorney, Daniel Fitch. I'd used Daniel for the real estate closing on Pemberton Road and for 2 contract reviews during my last years with the city. He was methodical, unhurried, and he had the specific quality of man who did not ask more questions than necessary. I called him at 9:58 a.m. and said, Daniel, I need to schedule a consultation this week. Personal matter. Estate adjacent. He said, come in Thursday at 2. I said, I'll be there. That was it. 2 calls. 12 minutes. I put my phone back in my pocket, went to the machine, got another cup of the terrible coffee, and sat back down in the orange chair to wait for Dr. Webb to tell me I could see my father. Sandra called at 11:07. I let it ring. At 11:19, she texted, Gerald, how is he? I wrote back, mild heart attack. Stable. Keeping him for observation. She wrote back, God. Okay, let me know. I set the phone face down on my knee. Let me know. My father was lying in a bed 30 feet away with a troponin elevation and a scheduled echocardiogram, and she wrote, let me know like I'd send her a weather update. I got to see him at 11:40. He was sitting up, monitors on his chest, reading glasses on, a printed patient information sheet in his hand that he had apparently been annotating with a pen the nurse had left. He looked tired. He also looked like Harold Mercer, which meant he looked like a man who was managing the situation with more composure than the situation warranted. He looked up when I came in. About time. I sat down beside the bed. How are you feeling? Like a man who waited too long. His voice was dry. Webb told me. Yeah, I cleared my throat. Dad, you should have called me at 4. I didn't want to bother you. I know. I looked at him. Don't do that again. He considered me for a moment. The monitors beeped once. Steadily. Sandra didn't come. It wasn't a question. He said it the way my father stated things he already knew, plain and without inflection, the way he'd said your tire's low or that fence post isn't plumb, as a matter of observable fact. She had a call. I said, at 9. He picked up the patient information sheet. Read something. Set it down. Gerald. His voice shifted. Not harder, more deliberate. The way it got when he was about to say something he'd chosen carefully. How long has it been like this? I didn't answer immediately. With Sandra. He looked at me over his glasses. How long? I sat back in the chair. Thought about the honest answer. A while, I said. He nodded slowly. Long enough? I looked at my father, 79 years old, fresh off a heart attack, for in his arm, monitors beeping, and he was asking me the question I had been failing to ask myself for roughly 4 years. Yeah, I said quietly. Long enough. He reached over and put his hand on my forearm. Once. Held it for exactly 3 seconds. Harold Mercer never held on longer than 3 seconds. Physical affection being, for his generation, a thing expressed in duration rather than repetition. Then released it and picked up his reading sheet again. Margaret Osei came to the hospital on Friday morning. My father had called her himself Thursday afternoon, which I did not know until she appeared in the doorway of his room at 10:15 a.m. with a leather folder under her arm and the specific unrushed calm of a professional who considers hospital visits a normal part of her practice. Mr. Mercer, she said, and my father said, Margaret, come in, as though she was arriving for a scheduled appointment at his kitchen table rather than a hospital bedside in room 214 of the cardiac unit. I stood to leave. My father said stay. Stay. I stayed. The conversation lasted 51 minutes. I won't give you every clause. Some things belong to my father. But I will tell you what changed, because that's what you're here for, and my father would want me to be precise about it. The power of attorney, which had designated Sandra as secondary agent after me, was revised. Sandra's name was removed. Ray Okafor's name was added in her place, which I had not anticipated, and which, when Margaret read aloud, caused her to look at my father, who was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had thought about something for considerably longer than the past 48 hours. I asked him, quietly, after Margaret had finished and stepped out to make a call, whether he was sure about Ray. Man came to my house at 6 a.m. in his own vehicle and stayed till noon to finish a crossword. My father said, I think that qualifies. I had no argument for that. I still don't. The health care directive was updated. His advanced directive, last reviewed in 2021, was refreshed with 3 specific additions I won't detail here. And finally, the beneficiary designation on the investment accounts he'd held since 1998, accounts that had been built over 30 years of careful, deliberate saving, the way Harold Mercer did everything, without fanfare and without deviation, was reviewed and reissued. Sandra's name did not appear on the revised documents. I want to be clear about something. My father did not do this for me. I want you to understand that, because it matters. Harold Mercer had been watching for years with the patient, methodical attention of a man who builds systems and understands how pressure accumulates in the wrong places. He had watched Sandra choose dinner parties over hospital visits. He had watched her deprioritize his son's family with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had calculated correctly that nobody was keeping score. She had not counted on my father keeping score. She had not counted on the fact that Harold Mercer, who had kept his house perfect and his car clean and his word solid for 79 years, applied exactly that same standard to the people he allowed into his family's life. He was not angry. His voice during those 51 minutes with Margaret Osei was the same voice he used to explain how to read a drainage plan or adjust a carburetor. Level, precise, completely decided. Margaret shook my hand at the door and said, Your father is one of the clearest thinkers I've worked with. And I said, I know. I have always known. And she said it shows and left. Thursday at 2 p.m. I was in Daniel Fitch's office on Trade Street. I sat across from him in a leather chair, folder on my knee, and I told him plainly what I was considering. He listened without interrupting, asked 4 questions, took 3 pages of notes in handwriting, so small I could not read it from across the desk. When I finished, he put the pen down. Gerald, he leaned back. Let me ask you something. Is this a decision you've made or a decision you're making? I thought about that for exactly 2 seconds. Made, I said. He nodded. Okay, then let's talk about how to do this correctly. Sandra called 37 times between Thursday morning and Saturday afternoon. I answered twice. Both times I said I was with my father, and I'd call her back. Both times I didn't call her back because I wasn't ready, not because I was punishing her, because I was working, the way I always worked, methodically, with all the necessary information gathered before I opened my mouth, and the information was not yet complete. She called for the 41st time at 8:14 Saturday morning. I was at Kowalski's Hardware on South Tryon Street, buying replacement weather stripping for my father's garage door. One of the small, practical things I could do for him before he came home. When my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, I looked at the screen. Sandra, call 41. I set the weather stripping on the counter, paid cash, $43 and some change, took my bag, walked to my truck, and sat in the parking lot for a moment. 41 calls in 48 hours from a woman who had looked at me at 6:09 a.m. on Thursday and said, "Not my problem." Something quiet moved through me then, not satisfaction exactly and not anger, more like the specific feeling of a thing being confirmed. She understood now that something had shifted. She didn't know what, didn't know how far, didn't know yet about the documents or the revised beneficiary designations or the Thursday meeting with Daniel Fitch. She only knew that Gerald Mercer had said, "Okay," at 6:09 in the morning and had not fully returned since. And that was apparently more terrifying than the nothing she'd been treating him as for the better part of 4 years. I drove to Concord to bring my father home. He was discharged Saturday at 11 a.m. He refused a wheelchair to the door, same as he always refused assistance he didn't need, and walked out of Atrium Health Cabarrus in his blue flannel shirt and work pants, looking like a man who had passed a test he hadn't studied for, because he'd been living the right answers his whole life. Dr. Webb shook his hand at the exit and said, "Mr. Mercer, take it easy for the next 2 weeks." My father said, "I'll take it easy when the garden needs it." Webb looked at me. I shrugged. He laughed. He'd only known my father for 3 days, and he already understood. I got him home to Caldwell Street, made his lunch, soup, the specific kind, which I had bought at the store on the way, because I knew he wouldn't have a brand he liked in the pantry. Checked the medications, read the labels out loud, organized them on the kitchen counter by time of day, morning left to right. He watched me do this from the kitchen table with the expression of a man who would rather do it himself, but understood the gesture for what it was. We sat after. Coffee for me, tea for him, the ceramic rooster on the counter, the afternoon light through the window over the sink. "You're going to be all right," I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I know that." He looked at me. "Are you?" I thought about Daniel Fitch's office, about Margaret Osei closing her folder, about Ray Okafor saying, "Don't thank me for that. That's just what you do," about Sandra's name, absent from documents that had previously held it, gone now the way certain things go when the people who place them there finally see them clearly. "Yeah," I said, "I'm going to be all right." He nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who believed you. There's something my father said to me years ago. I was maybe 25, frustrated about something at work, some project that wasn't moving the way it needed to. And he said, "Gerald, you know what separates the men who build things that last from the men who just build things?" I said no. He said, "The ones that last are built by men who know the difference between what's solid and what just looks solid." He tapped the table. "Take your time figuring that out. Don't rush it. But once you know the difference," he said, "you don't unknow it." I drove home to Charlotte on Saturday afternoon. The sky was the specific gray of a February afternoon that hasn't decided yet whether to rain. I had my father's suit contained in the back, my father's spare key in my jacket pocket, because he'd insisted, and Ray's Pathfinder key on the passenger seat to return before dinner. I had a meeting scheduled with Daniel Fitch on Monday at 9. I had a conversation ahead of me that I was not looking forward to and was completely prepared for and would handle the way I handled everything. Plainly, without drama, with every necessary document in order. Sandra's car was in the driveway when I pulled up to Pemberton Road at 4:22 p.m. I sat in the driveway for a full minute, watched my own house, thought about my father at his kitchen table, about Ray in the parking lot saying I'll be here, about 41 calls in 48 hours from a woman who had told me at 6:09 a.m. on Thursday morning that my father's chest pains were not her problem. I got out of the truck, walked up the porch steps, opened the front door. She was in the kitchen. She turned when she heard me. Her face was the face of a woman who had been waiting, and who had been using the waiting to construct something, a version of events, a framework, an explanation that would recenter the conversation somewhere she could manage it. I had seen that face before. I recognized it immediately. "Gerald," her voice was careful. "I've been trying to reach you. I know, I set my keys on the hook, my jacket on the chair. I stood at the far end of the kitchen counter and looked at her. Is your father okay? He's home. He's fine. She exhaled. Thank God. She crossed her arms. Gerald, I know you're upset. I'm not upset. She stopped. I want to be precise about that. I said it the way my father would have said it. Level, plain, completely true. I'm not upset, Sandra. I said, I'm clear. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Pemberton Road. The refrigerator hummed. I looked at my wife across the kitchen for a long moment. 19 years. A house on Pemberton Road. A driveway. A hook with keys on it. Two people who had, somewhere along the way, stopped moving toward each other and had both, in their own ways, been pretending not to notice. I need you to hear me, I said. Not my problem were the last words you should have said to me on Thursday morning. Not because of what they meant about you, because of what they told me about us. Gerald, let me finish. She stopped. I've spent a long time telling myself that things were basically fine, that we were basically fine. I said, my father sat in his kitchen alone from 4 a.m. until I called at 6 because he didn't want to bother anyone. A man who gave his entire life to his family, and he didn't want to bother anyone. And the woman I married heard that and went back to sleep. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet now, slightly, the composure cracking at the edges in the way that composure does when the argument it was built to win turns out not to be the argument happening. I looked at her and I felt it. The last specific tension of a thing I've been holding together with the intention of things eventually improving, going completely slack. Not with anger, not with grief. Exactly. With the quiet, clarifying release of a man who finally knows what solid actually feels like. I have a meeting on Monday, I said. I think you should have one too. I walked to the front door. She didn't follow. I opened it. The February air came in cold and clean and entirely straightforward. There are men who mistake a quiet life for a small one. My father was never one of them. He built things that held, loved people who showed up, and spent 79 years understanding the difference between what was solid and what just looked solid. That's not a small life. That's the only kind worth building. And on the morning that mattered most, when it counted, the man who showed up in 4 minutes and 50 seconds on a recovering knee without being asked twice was a man sitting at my father's kitchen table finishing a Thursday crossword. Not the woman who went back to sleep. Some debts can't be paid back. They can only be honored forward. I intend to honor mine. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.